Functions are very helpful in programming because we can write code that we can reuse throughout our program. And that is one of the main principles in programming. Do not repeat yourself. If you can avoid any repetition, that is recommended. Because your code will be easier to read, easier to maintain, and it will be less error prone. Okay, so let's start talking about functions. How can you define a function? A function is basically a code block with special characteristics that we can reuse in our program, and we can send information from the main program to the function and from the function to the main program. They're like small compartments of our main program that have their own unique characteristics, and variables that are defined inside a particular function can only be used within that function. Okay, so let's define our first function. First we write def. That is a keyword that we use in Python to define a function. Then we write the name of the function, how we will call the function from the main program. Usually that is a verb or a descriptive name that says exactly what the function will do. In this case, our function will be called sayHi. What will the function do? We define that inside the body of the function. Again, we are indenting the body of the function like we did with conditionals and loops. And in the first line, we are defining the header, the function header. And this is the body. In this case, you may not see all the benefits of defining a function because we are only writing one line here. But if we had 5, 10, 20, or even 50 lines of code, then we would be avoiding repetition. And that can be super helpful. Now, if we go back to our main program, notice that right now we are not indenting the line, so it's not part of the function definition, and we call it with parentheses. To call a function, we write parentheses after its name. We see hi as the output. Okay? Then we can call it multiple times, like this, and reuse that line of code that we defined in the body of the function. That way, whenever we call the function, we will be printing hi. Exactly what we were looking for, reducing repetition. A function can also take values from the main program to customize how it works. For example, a name. Let's say that we want the function to be able to customize the message and mention the name of the person. So we just write name within parentheses, and that is what we call a parameter. Functions can take parameters. Those are values that they can receive when they are called. Remember when we called methods and other functions that already came built in with Python? Sometimes we passed some values to them. Those were called arguments. And those arguments have their corresponding parameters in the function definition. So we pass values to them, and they are replaced, those values are replaced wherever they appear in the function. So if we pass the name Gino, when the function runs, this value will be replaced by Gino. If you're curious about why I'm writing the string like this, well, it's an F string. In Python, if we add an F before the string, we can write curly braces to replace the value of a variable in the string, so it's more readable. Let's see how this works. Let's add an exclamation mark. We are passing the name, the value Gino, to that particular parameter. This is the argument, and this is the parameter. The parameter is sort of like creating a template of where we want the value, the argument, to be replaced when we call the function. Everywhere where we use a parameter, we will be using the actual value that we passed to the function. So if we call the function again with Nora instead of Gino, we will be replacing Nora here. And that is super powerful because we can avoid repetition and create a general template of what should happen when we call the function with a particular value. Let's see. We see hi Gino and hi Nora. Like you can see, the arguments were assigned to the parameter and they were replaced wherever we used the parameter in the function definition. We can also have multiple parameters. Let's see this example of a function that will multiply two values, a and b. Here we are defining two parameters, a and b, and the function will print the result of multiplying a and b. Now let's multiply 3 and 6. And let's also multiply 8 and 2. And let's also multiply 2 and 9. We are reusing this line of code by calling the function multiple times. Let's check the results. We see 3 times 6, which is 18, 8 times 2, which is 16, and 2 times 9, which is 18. So the function is working correctly. It is printing exactly what we need to the terminal. And it is assigning the corresponding arguments to the parameters. The first argument will be assigned to the first parameter, and the second argument will be assigned to the second parameter. Okay, so they are assigned in their corresponding order. That is a key feature of arguments and parameters. Now, let's see an example of a more complex function, more than one line. This is a function that will count how many vowels a string has. It will take one parameter called word. Inside the function, we will define a variable called number of vowels. Initially, this variable will have the value 0. This will be a local variable. If we try to access that variable outside the function, it will not work. But if we define a variable in our main program, that variable will be available inside the function because it will be global. Now let's have a for loop. For each character in the word in the string, if the character is in this string, this is another operator that you can use to check if an element is in a sequence, in this case in a string. These are the vowels. Then we are going to increment the value of the number of vowels counter by 1. And then we are going to print the number of vowels variable. Notice that right now we are writing print at the same level of indentation as the keyword for, because we are not trying to print this multiple times. This line will not be part of the for loop. So if we don't want the line to be part of the for loop, we write it at the same level of indentation as the keyword for. You can see how we are using indentation to separate the different lines or blocks of code. Here we have the for loop, and inside the for loop we have a conditional. And inside the conditional we have this line. Awesome, right? In Python, indentation is super important. So let's call this function countVowels to count the number of vowels in the string programming. And let's count it again in Python. And again in coding. And let's run the code to see how it works. We see 3, 1, and 2. This is the number of vowels in each one of these strings. I hope this example illustrates the importance of functions in programming. You can see how we wrote 5 lines just once and we reused them 3 times. That would be 15 lines of repetition in our code. Instead, we are creating or defining a function and we are reusing it with the word parameter. Each one of these strings is passed as an argument and assigned to the parameter word. And then, the same general process is applied to all the strings. Another great thing about functions is that you can return values from the functions. Just like we can pass a value to a function, we can return a value from the function. Let's say that instead of print, we want to return the number of vowels. Why are we going to do this? Let's see. For now, let's keep the call to print. If we only print the value of number of vowels, let's see what happens if we try to assign the result of calling the function to a variable. Let's see what value we get. We get the value none. Okay? So basically, we're not getting any value from the function. By default, when a function doesn't return a value explicitly, you will get the value none. Remember that this is a special value in Python. So, if we want to return that value, that result, so we can assign it to a variable, instead of printing it, we need to return it. Now, if we run the program, we see the value 1. Because the result was returned, we assigned it to a variable, and then we can use the variable in our program. That's the difference between printing the value and returning it. When we return it, we can use it in the program and we can assign it to a variable. So that's super helpful too. Great, so now you know the fundamentals of functions in Python. We also saw parameters and arguments and the return statement. These are very powerful concepts that can be applied to any programming language. Next, we will see a little bit more about the Python documentation and how you can expand your knowledge by browsing the documentation. So I will see you in the next part of the course, so let's continue.